Hello and welcome. Today we are talking about misplaced modifiers. $100 cash reward if found. The objectives. We're going to learn to identify the modifiers in their different forms. We're going to identify and fix misplaced modifiers. We're going to identify and fix dangling modifiers, which are similar but a little bit different. Some vocabulary terms we need to know. A prepositional phrase. Here's an example of one in the middle. Prepositional phrases often tell us where or when. Participle phrases, here's an example. Strolling through the park. Participle phrase needs to have that verbal in front of it. That's a participle, and the whole thing is a phrase because all of these words go with strolling. Through the park, incidentally, is a prepositional phrase. So we have a prepositional phrase inside of a participle phrase. And adjective clauses. We've talked about clauses before. Here's an example. That opens the door. Inside a sentence, that would make sense. This would be the dependent clause that would go with the main clause. So we'll look at a few of those. Prepositional phrases come first. Remember that the prepared plane flew blank the storms. So words that can fit in that blank. Here's some of them. Into, around, through. All of these tell us place, above, but before could tell us place. It could also tell us time. After tells us time, during tells us time. And then there are some prepositions that really don't work in that phrase very well. That would be like despite. No, despite actually works. Plus, minus, of, per. Those don't really work, but they are prepositions. So prepositional phrases can be adjectives. Adjectives describe nouns and pronouns. The key inside the drawer opens the door. What is the prepositional phrase in this sentence? The key inside the drawer opens the door. The prepositional phrase is inside the drawer. And one way to test to see if we have the prepositional phrase, we can take it out. Usually we can take them out of a sentence. The key opens the door. Yeah, that makes sense. So we know that we've probably identified a modifier. Okay, the word modified is key. This whole thing is an adjective. Adjectives describe nouns or pronouns. Key is definitely a noun. This whole thing is an adjective describing key. If we moved it, the key opens the door inside the drawer, we now have a problem because it comes after door and it looks like it's modifying the word door. And that's not right. That makes this a misplaced modifier. That happens every once in a while with prepositional phrases. But we'll look at adverbs next and we'll see why it gets a little confusing when we have the two together. So inside the drawer is still the prepositional phrase. It's in a different sentence. Inside the drawer stirs the gremlin. Well, this is an adverb this time. Inside the drawer is an adverb. What is it modifying? Stirs. Adverbs modify verbs. They also modify adverbs and adjectives. But in this case, we're just going to look at adverbs that modify verbs. And stirs is the verb that is being modified. It's right next to stirs. It doesn't have to be. Adverbs have the license to jump around the sentence a little bit. They can go to different places. They have more license. They don't have complete license to be wherever they want to be, but they have more freedom. The gremlin stirs inside the drawer. We rearrange the sentence. It's still next to stirs, but it doesn't have to be. We could say inside the drawer, the gremlin stirs. That makes sense as well. So it doesn't have to be right next to stirs, just in both of these examples. It is. Here's where maybe it gets a little bit confusing. We can put it after gremlin. The gremlin inside the drawer stirs. Now we've changed the meaning of this prepositional phrase a little bit. If it comes right after the noun, it seems like it is modifying the noun. And so now it becomes an adjective again, and it is answering the question, which gremlin stirs? Because maybe there's a question of, there are several of them, and we don't know which one is doing the stirring. So that's where they get a little confusing, because we have adjectives and we have adverbs. We have to be careful where they go. If it is an adjective, it has to go right after the noun that it is modifying, or it's in the wrong place. If it's an adverb, it can jump around a little bit. Adjective clauses. There are also adverb clauses we talked about before, but those are seldom misplaced because they have that opportunity to move around. So some adjective clauses. What's wrong with this sentence? The key is in the drawer that opens the door. I think it's obvious that something is in the wrong place. That opens the door is the adjective clause. It's the underlined portion there, and it's in the wrong place. So it needs to be next to the word that it modifies. So what word does this modify? That opens the door. It modifies key. So it needs to come right after key. So let's move it there. The key that opens the door is in the drawer. So it's similar to the last one we did. It just has some more words in it because this is a clause. And an adjective clause, it modifies a noun just like an adjective prepositional phrase does. But what is an adjective clause? Well, I'm going to have to go back here. An adjective clause is a miniature sentence. Really, any clause is a miniature sentence. And what does a sentence has to have? It has to have two things. It has to have a subject and a verb, or we could say a subject and a simple predicate. So in that prepositional phrase, that opens the door, what is the subject and what is the verb? Went the other way. That is the subject, opens is the verb. So that is a miniature sentence all by itself. But the main clause, everything outside of what's underlined, that also has to have a subject and a verb. So let's kind of pretend that's not there. The key is in the drawer. We can take it out because it's an adjective. And the key is in the drawer. That should have a subject and it should have a simple predicate. And now we can see it. Key is the subject, is the verb or the simple predicate. Okay, participle phrases, those can be misplaced as well. What's wrong with this sentence? Freshly painted, the dog pursued the car. Well, freshly painted is our participle phrase, and it is right next to the dog. It looks like the dog was freshly painted. Now, there's some dog owners out there that do some weird things, but I don't think they painted the dog in this case. That's right, the participle phrase is in the wrong place. What word does the phrase modify? Well, it doesn't modify dog. Probably modifies the word car. So let's put it where it needs to go. Let's move it to the right place. We're going to put it in front of car. The dog pursued the freshly painted car. And this is an adjective. An adjective should go next to the noun that it modifies in most cases. It can go after it. In this case, it goes before. Why is it hyphenated? Well, we have an adverb and we have a participle, and they together compose an adjective that modifies a noun. When we have kind of a made-up adjective coming before a noun, we hyphenated it. Okay, what's wrong with this sentence? The dog gained on the car, slobbering profusely. That's right. The car is not slobbering profusely, it's just slobbering. No, it's not even slobbering. The car is not doing the slobbering, but it looks like it is. So what is the word that should be modified? That's right, it's dog. So now we need to move that participle phrase, slobbering profusely, we need to move it next to the dog. Here's an option. Slobbering profusely, the dog gained on the car. We set it off with a comma because it does kind of interrupt the flow of the sentence. It's good writing, but we do need to put a comma there. We have another option though. We can put it after the dog. The dog, comma, slobbering profusely, comma, gained on the car. That works too. So we have options, but it does have to go right after the dog. Adjectives are stuck next to their nouns in a lot of cases. Okay. What is a participle phrase? Now that we looked at how they can be misplaced and how they can be corrected, let's just kind of review what they are. So barking ferociously, the dog approached the stranger. Barking ferociously is our participle phrase. It's similar to the one we just looked at. Barking is a verbal, because we think of barking as an action, and we're tempted to just say, oh, it's a verb. That's the verb of the sentence. Well, it's not really, because approached is the verb that goes with dog. It's the conjugated verb that goes with the subject. So barking is a verbal that is being used to make this sentence a little bit more informational. We're kind of putting two sentences together. So instead of saying, the dog is barking ferociously, the dog approaches the stranger, we make it a little more interesting by putting this idea in front of this idea and combining the two. Ferociously is an adverb that is modifying barking, but the whole thing together is a participle phrase. The whole thing is one big adjective describing dog. We couldn't help but notice the new car gleaming in the sun. In this case, we have the participle phrase coming at the end. Gleaming in the sun is the participle phrase. Gleaming is the verbal, because something can gleam. And it's a modifying car, so in this case it goes right after the car. I chose not to set it off with a comma because I didn't think it interrupted the flow of the sentence. I also think it is essential, and we'll talk about that another time, what's an essential modifier. This participle phrase has a prepositional phrase inside of it. In the sun is a prepositional phrase, the whole thing is a participle phrase, the whole thing is one big adjective describing car. Alright, so barking, gleaming, they end in ing. Participles don't always end in ing. They can be past tense. So sanded and primed, those are past tense, past participles. And in this case, they are modifying the car. Sanded and primed, comma, the car awaited its new coat of paint. I'm about to have my car painted. I'm so excited. Telling everybody about it. Okay, so past tense, present tense, still participle phrases. That might be a little confusing. Maybe you haven't had a lot of experience with participle phrases, prepositional phrases, adjective clauses. Really what we're focusing on today is the misplaced modifiers. And if we know that they're misplaced and we know how to fix them, that's way more important than always being able to identify them. Okay, what's wrong with this sentence? Rummaging through the trash, the car was spotted. Here we have our prepositional phrase, or well, that is a prepositional phrase. Participle phrase, rummaging through the trash, all one big adjective describing who? There's nobody to rummage on 2 legs or 4 legs. There's nobody doing this action, spotting the car. So, this part is okay, but it's dangling. And it's really not its fault. The fault is over here. We're going to fix that part of the sentence. We're not going to fix the modifier. We can do that by adding a subject. Now we have a dog doing the action. The dog spotted the car. Let's go back a little bit. The car was spotted. That's another problem. That's a stylistic problem in our writing. And that is called passive voice, because we have the object doing the action. We want the subject doing the action. The dog is doing the spotting. Subject, predicate. That looks better in this case. That's active voice. So one problem leads to another. We fix the passive voice, make it active voice, and now we have the noun where it needs to be, so it can be modified by this big adjective. Okay, we took it apart. Rummaging through the trash. One big adjective. Rummaging is the participle. Whole thing's participle phrase. Dog is being modified. Did we meet our objectives today? We learned how to identify different types of modifiers. In the drawer, what kind of modifier is that? That's right, it is a prepositional phrase. It can be an adjective or an adverb depending on how it's used. That opens the door. What kind of modifier? That's right, it is an adjective clause. It's going to go in the middle of a sentence. And then sitting in the car, that is a participle phrase. Sitting is the participle, the verbal, and then in the car is a prepositional phrase modifying it. The whole thing is one big adjective describing somebody or something, because it could be a dog. Okay, we learned how to identify and fix misplaced modifiers. So let's look at an example of one. In the refrigerator, the milk tastes funny. What's the problem with that, this prepositional phrase? Well, it looks like we have to be actually in the refrigerator, which I don't advise because there's no air in there and it's cold. So it looks like only when we're in the refrigerator does the milk taste funny. It looks like it is an adverb. Really, it's supposed to be an adjective. The milk in the refrigerator tastes funny. Now that it comes right after milk, we know that it is modifying the milk. Remember, the adjective has to be next to the noun that it modifies. With prepositions, that's always the case. Noun, adjective. And we learned how to identify and fix dangling modifiers. So we'll look at an example of that. You're going to love this one. Skipping through the park, a severed finger was found. Well, somebody is skipping through the park. We don't know who it is. And again, we have passive voice here. A severed finger was found. Instead, we need to have somebody finding it. We found a severed finger. Now, we is next to the participle phrase that it is describing. That is all for misplaced modifiers today. Thank you.